Welcome, everybody. I hope that you can all hear me, and welcome very much to this very exciting event tonight. I believe we've got nearly 200 people in attendance, and I'm very excited to be chairing this for you. My name is Juliet Burton, and I'll tell you a little bit more about why I'm here in a second. But firstly, the most important people here are you all watching, so thank you so much for attending. And we've also got Jill, who is the Chief Executive of Devo Connect, who is helping out with hosting. So please do get involved in the chat. We want this to be very interactive. So please, from the get-go, get your fingers exercised in the Zoom chat. Ask questions, become interactive, and have any comments you like. Jill will be there, and she will be fielding your questions to the panel later on. And I will also now introduce to you your wonderful candidates representing our political parties this evening. So we have the fabulous Right Honourable Andy Burnham from the Labour Party. We have the fantastic Melanie Horrocks from the Green Party. We have Simon Lepori from the incredible Liberal Democrats, to give them the full name. I somehow gave them a nickname there. And also the wonderful Stephen Morris from the English Democrats. So thank you so much, all four of you, for being here. So I'm going to give you a little introduction to begin with, and then we'll get straight into asking the questions. So firstly, an introduction into what we're doing tonight, and also to myself as well. So we also need to say an apology before we get going from the Conservative candidate Laura Evans and the Reform UK candidate Nick Buckley. Both of them sadly were too busy to be here with us tonight. But I'm very excited to be here with you. This is such an honour for me. I am Juliet Burton, and I believe that my social media details and website will be shared in the chat throughout this session, at the beginning and at the end as well. I'm a comedian. So if you at any point feel the kind of need to laugh, and if I say anything sort of slightly funny, feel free to laugh. I feel like we need to break some tension at the moment. We all need a good laugh. So follow that instinct. I think that's a good idea. I'm also a writer, and I have toured at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. I've sold out 4 years in a row at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. I've toured around the UK many times, and I also have toured in New Zealand and Australia. And actually my producers for the Edinburgh Fringe are based in Manchester, so if they happen to be watching, then feel free to say hi. Gag Reflex, that's genuinely the name of the company, Gag Reflex. If you're here, say hi in the chat. If not, I will pass all this on to them, don't worry. So I'm also an ambassador for Rethink Mental Illness, which is a mental health charity, and yes, as you can probably tell by my accent, I do actually have mental health conditions. So I have been diagnosed with 13 different mental health conditions in my lifetime. I've been an inpatient in mental health services 5 times. I was sectioned under the Mental Health Act when I was 17, and I've been in therapy for about 20 years now. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I'm what psychiatrists might call a bit much. So I was sectioned when I was 17, and I spent my 18th birthday sectioned under the Mental Health Act in hospital. But then I suspect some of our panellists probably spent their 18th birthday drunk under a table in Wetherspoons. And I think I actually had the better venue, didn't I? Yeah. So I have been performing comedy about my mental health conditions for many years, about 10 years now. I've been diagnosed with the following conditions: anorexia, anxiety disorder, bipolar disorder, body dysmorphic disorder, bulimia, compulsive overeating disorder or binge eating disorder, depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, which is why this list is organised alphabetically. Also, I've been diagnosed with separation anxiety disorder. So let's see if I let any of you leave at the end of this hustings. And I've also been diagnosed most recently with agoraphobia. That's not just because of lockdown. Paranoia, and I've been diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which actually is at the root of all the others. It's a bit like if complex post-traumatic stress disorder were like the Backstreet Boys, then all the other illnesses are their solo albums. I'm not saying that the Backstreet Boys solo albums cause mental illness, but that's my personal theory I've got there. So yes, my life has been saved by mental health services. That is why I am here tonight, and why this matters so much. I would not be here were it not for the mental health services that saved my life over the years in many multiple different ways. I've been on medication and off medication. I've been a service user for many years, and so I'm going to be holding these panelists accountable for everything they're saying, and I hope they're realising how important what they're talking about is. So I have been performing comedy for many years about my mental health, and when I first began, people would come up to me and say really stigmatised things like, oh, you can't be ill, you don't look ill. Yeah, well, you don't look rude, but here we are. They'd also say things like, well, mental illness it's all made up, isn't it? It's just attention seeking. And I want to make it very clear from the get-go, mental illness is not attention seeking, okay? But performing comedy, that definitely is. I have nowadays, though, found that people are coming up to me and saying that they're all diagnosed, or some of them are self-diagnosed. Every other person seems to be self-diagnosed with depression. To be honest, it's really starting to steal my thunder. Yeah, I mean, firstly, it's really bad that people are self-diagnosing themselves and misdiagnosing themselves, but also I used to be special. I have actually got a vested interest in tonight's hustings. One of my favourite venues in the entire country is the Lapori. The Lapori in Salford. I now know, having performed there a few times, it's definitely not technically in Manchester. The Salford crew really made me know that was not the case. I love the Lapori so much, and I actually had my last live gig before the first lockdown. It was on the 13th of March at the Lapori, and it was wonderful. I was on my second UK tour. We'd done 3 dates. We just kicked that off, and that was a bigger false start than a marriage to Elizabeth Taylor, I can tell you. We had to then ditch the rest of the tour, and my stage manager for those first few days of that tour was my my flatmate David. I thought that, we lived together, we may as well work together. Don't worry, we're definitely not going to sleep together, because one thing I've actually found out is that there's one thing that's going to guarantee that a man won't sleep with me, and that is living with me. So we have gotten to know each other very, very much over the last year. We've obviously got to know each other too much, as we all have during lockdowns. And David actually told me recently, did you know that statistically, arguments in the UK have increased over the past year? And I argued with him over that. So he's probably right. Now, I would love for you to follow me on social media. I'd love for you to also talk about this hustings on social media as well. If you do, I'm going to give you the hashtag for that in a bit. So Jill will be in the chat fielding your questions to the panelists as well, and I have some questions to ask them myself. So having introduced myself, this is why I'm here. I also need to let you know that this is a very important topic for all of us. We all have mental health, just like we all have physical health, okay? It's not that some of us have mental health and some of us have mental illness. It's that we all have mental health. So some of us might have a short-term mental health condition. Some of us have a long-term mental health condition. Some of us might just have to manage our mental health throughout the rest of our lives. So during the pandemic, the government and media attention has largely focused, as we all know, on the acute NHS services and to a lesser extent social care. But the massive impacts on mental health have received far less attention. That's why we're here tonight. The BACP and the YouGov undertook a public perception survey in March 2021, and 3/4, 75% of people who took part in that survey said that the coronavirus pandemic had negatively affected their mental health to some extent, with 2/5, that's 40% of them, saying it has affected them to a large extent or moderately. And this backs up another recent report by the Institute for Fiscal Studies, which showed up to 1/5 of the population have experienced persistently worse mental health over the course of the pandemic. You see, other people are struggling with their mental health because they're going through a really difficult time. Me, I struggle when at the best of times, so this is easy for me. Now, the vaccination rollout is well underway. I've had my first jab, which I'm very excited by. I had not been that excited by a vaccination since the vaccinations at school that meant that I could miss double maths. So now that the vaccination rollout is well underway and COVID-19 infections and death have thankfully begun to decrease, it is time for the mental health pandemic and the vital importance of counselling and psychotherapy services, the role that they play, to be recognised and addressed. We are going to be talking about that tonight. Now, our major Greater Manchester hustings will therefore hear from candidates on how to build back better mental health generally and better mental health services across Greater Manchester. The event will be as interactive as possible, and we really want you to get involved, and also equal time will be afforded to all candidates. So do, as I've said already, get involved in the Zoom chat, ask your questions. Jill will be fielding them later on. And with the candidates, this is your warning, we're going to try to limit your time to answer each question to 2 minutes. And I've been told that if you go on a bit too long, then there is a chance that you will be muted, okay? So that's your warning. If you are called, my lovely audience, if you're called to ask a question, then please unmute yourself, make sure you unmute yourself, and wait to be brought into the Zoom viewing area before asking your questions. The meeting will be run with respect. This is a big thing for tonight. We want everyone to behave respectfully to each other, so please let's all listen and have a courteous and constructive debate without any interruptions or offensive language of any sort. Now, we're going to include in offensive language, we don't want any homophobia, transphobia, racism, sexism, any of the isms, ableism, and I will be calling you up if any of you do step over those lines. So we want everybody to feel included and inclusive and respected tonight. And finally, please do feel free to tweet. You can tag me if you'd like as well, and please use the hashtag #BuildBackMentalHealth. So hashtag #BuildBackMentalHealth. With that introduction on the way, we are now going to go to our first question, and it's going to be asked by the very wonderful and lovely Hayden Williams, Chief Executive Officer of the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy, BACP, who have kindly sponsored this important event, and he's also going to explain a little bit about their role. Hayden.
Well, a very good evening, and firstly I'd like to offer my sincere thanks to all the mayoral candidates for being prepared to be part of the panel this evening and to discuss these really important issues. It's much appreciated. I'm just going to say I'm absolutely delighted also to see so many BACP members and counselling service providers across Greater Manchester also attending this evening's event, helping us to champion the counselling sector. And especially following the huge mental health challenges inflicted by this dreadful pandemic. Now, mental health services and particularly counselling and psychotherapy will need to be a key investment priority of the Greater Manchester Mayor when they take office in May. And counselling and psychotherapy will be key to helping the city and the region to build back better. BACP's 1,500 or so members, outstanding members across Greater Manchester, are a critical element to the local mental health workforce. Can't stress that hard enough. Working across the region's many diverse communities, and our members are really well placed to support that vital work. So I'm not going to hold up proceedings by speaking too much, because I could so easily do so because there's so much to say, but I'm just going to say how pleased I am to kickstart this evening's proceedings, and I'm going to start by asking the first question, which is as follows. What is your understanding of the impact of the COVID pandemic on the mental health of the residents of Greater Manchester?
Julia, who? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I'm back. So firstly, we'd like to come to, and we'll start with Andy Burnham, please.
Thanks, Julia, and thanks, Hayden. And everybody, actually, it's wonderful to have a mental health hustings. We didn't have this in 2017, so well done, all of you, because this is the conversation we need to be having. I think you said it, Julia, there is a mental health pandemic taking place in parallel to the COVID pandemic, and the mental health pandemic will be with us for much longer. So absolutely right to be discussing this tonight. To answer your question, Hayden, we do a Greater Manchester population survey. The results from February 21 said that 24% cited mental health as a big concern. So that kind of tallies, I think, with the figures that we've heard earlier. With regard to young people, we do a survey on young people's sense of hope and optimism for the future. So not quite the same question, but there's been a big drop in young people saying they feel hopeful and optimistic about the future. It's at 72%, down from 83% last year. So basically, what we've got here is a major challenge. We need to put mental health and well-being at the heart of our recovery, and the 10 leaders and myself have already committed to do that. It was a recommendation from our Independent Inequality Commission that we set up, chaired by Dr. Kate Pickett. We've accepted that recommendation. So now we're beginning to think about what does it mean to have a city region that has promoting good mental health and well-being every day. What does it mean to be able to deliver that? And we're developing our thinking, but tonight's going to be very important in that. I'm here to listen, actually, as much as to tell you what I intend to do. But we have said everyday mental health and well-being is absolutely going to be a sort of core concern. And I think the pandemic will have the effect of moving mental health right up the agenda. It's really interesting, Juliet, you were saying that, years ago, people wouldn't even talk about it. I was in Parliament the first time that an MP admitted openly to having had mental health problems. Life has moved on so much so quickly, where we are now having a very different debate about everyone acknowledging that everyone needs help with mental health support and well-being every day. And I think this is a chance actually to move the debate about mental health into a completely different sphere and a much better one, and we need to take it together. So thank you. That's just a start.
Thank you, Andy. Let's come to Melanie next, please. Melanie Horrocks from the Green Party.
Thanks, Julia, and thanks, Hayden, for the question. I think in recognising that there has been an impact on mental health due to COVID, is we must really acknowledge that there has been a very different impact on different groups within Greater Manchester. We've obviously seen that there's been very significant financial hardship caused by the pandemic, and that's added to increased levels of social isolation. And poverty and the accompanying financial stress, along with that social isolation, are really well known to be drivers of mental health and poor mental health and deteriorating mental health. But those who are living already in deprivation were much more likely to suffer as a result. And if we consider the difference between a single mum self-isolating in a tower block with several small children compared to a two-parent family living in suburbia with a large house and a large garden to be able to access, it's easy to see how there would be a significant difference in the impact. There's obviously been an impact on how people are able to access mental health services, and mental health providers have done an excellent job, as have so many people, in moving to online and giving an online provision to many. But for a lot of people, that just doesn't work, and they have been unable to access that support, as well as having their other support networks and coping strategies removed as a result of lockdowns, and that will have had an impact as well. We've seen an impact in children's mental health presentations, and in particular around eating disorders. And eating disorders are known to thrive in areas and in conditions when people are isolated, and that will have been a part of the reason why lockdown has contributed to that. We know that mental health workers and mental health providers are working as hard as they can, and what we need to acknowledge is the fact that there has been a huge increase in demand, but there has been a lack of resources and there's been a lack of finances to help. We had an underlying mental health crisis before COVID, and services were very seriously under-resourced, and the increase on them has really just added and exacerbated the existing problems and led to an increase in demand and an increase in problems accessing them. So all of those factors considered together must be addressed by the Mayor in coming in and dealing with mental health and building back better mental health after COVID.
Thank you very much, Melanie. We're going to come next to Simon Lepori from the Liberal Democrats, and apparently there seems to be some planes outside right now, so do forgive the noise.
Thanks, Juliet, and thanks for having me tonight. It's a hugely important issue, and I think we often forget that so much has been done over the past 20 years to get us where we are today. Mental health is still stigmatized, and it shouldn't be. It should be normalized completely. But when you've got a service that is still the poorer sister to the NHS, there isn't that parity of esteem flowing through the entire system for different issues, different problems that people may have through their lives. It's hard to tell people to actually put the two together and treat them equally, so they still stigmatized. I mean, across Greater Manchester, we know there has been real pressures on services. We know COVID has exacerbated those pressures, and that hasn't even been fully realised yet. Over the next few months, you're going to see people that have isolated over the past year come out of isolation and finally seek the help that they need, sometimes in acute settings and sometimes in non-acute settings. What is that going to do to the mental health services we already have? Our mental health services are already dealing with stretched resources in Greater Manchester. there's not enough beds. People are still going out of area for referrals and for beds. You know, that we don't have enough in Greater Manchester. I mean, Mind already highlighted issues with Greater Manchester, with Manchester's mental health services that predate the pandemic. They're still there. The problems are still there. So how do we build back better from a low base anyway? And so the report that Andy was alluding to is great. It's a great start. And I've run over time. As I said, it's a huge subject and we'll probably be talking about this throughout the evening. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon. And finally coming to Stephen Morris from the English Democrats on this first question, please.
Just emphasising what some of the others have said, there's been great strides made over the years in trying to get mental health recognised as a condition that affects anybody and everybody. The issue going forward is it's going to be got to be at the top of the list because the big pandemic of mental health is just coming on the horizon. We've seen in the last 12 months over 800,000 job losses, which is going to affect people. We've got 5 million on furlough currently, wondering whether they're going to go back to jobs or not. This is going to have a massive effect on mental health. From a trade union position where I deal with this day in, day out, where I have people inquiring about concerns about their jobs, about what they're going to do for money and their livelihoods. And this has a ripple effect right the way through the system. It affects the children, it affects the elderly that they may look after. So we've got to really look at how we can make mental health at the top of our list and make sure that everybody has access. I know there's quite a lot of figures been quoted, but I'm concerned about the unseen victims, the ones that are not reported. They are massive concerns. The statistics at the minute that are being shown are people who have come forward and actually admitted there is issues affecting them more than maybe issues going forward. But there's a lot of people that are still not engaging, and we've got to get involved with those unseen victims and bring them forward and say, highlight where they can turn to. And there's loads of things that have problems, because obviously we've seen with over 80,000 crimes not being reported by GMP. They can't turn to the police, they can't turn to the local authorities. So we need to put that message out there and tell them, where do you go to? This is where you go to. Because with 5 million still on furlough in the UK and their uncertainty of jobs, that's going to increase the strain on the mental health sector. And we've got to sort that. We've got to make sure we are prepared.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Jill, are there any supplementary questions from this question, from question 1?
Yeah. Yeah, we've had some interesting talk in the chat from Simone Finnegan, who works at 42nd Street, talking about the complexity of issues that young people and our families face, and what's the lasting implications for future generations. And also she goes on about the impact on social inequalities and the stigma, which Simon referenced as well, and that being exacerbated. There's a feeling around, you know, things getting worse. The particular question from Selena is, how will the next mayor make sure that mental health services are delivered again, so the problems doesn't get worse? You know, tonight's about building back better, and of course from my good friend Charlie Norman from Moss Care St Vincent and Greater Manchester Housing Providers, making the point in the chat there that people's living environments and where they live has obviously the link between housing and mental health, you know, needs to be made. So I think there's a few points there that we can reference as we go on.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jill. We'll move on to question 2 for now, but please do keep asking those questions, and I will be coming to Jill later on to field more questions to our panel. So question 2 comes from Dr. Shirley McDonald, who is a psychologist, psychotherapist, independent practitioner for children, young people and families. Shirley. Shirley, if you could unmute yourself and ask your question. Have we got Shirley in tonight?
Yeah,
Hello,
she's there.
yes.
Yes, just something.
No problem. It takes a long while to unmute. That mute button is a very long way away. Don't worry about it. So, Dr. Shirley, what would you like to ask?
Yeah, I would like to ask the panel, what is your vision for a mentally healthy Greater Manchester, and how would this be achieved?
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Shirley. So we'll come to Stephen Morris first, please, from the English Democrats.
But we've got to try and make it, it's a combination of all angles we've got to work at. We've got to make sure, like I've already mentioned about the police service fit for purpose, we've got to make sure that people have access to decent, safe public transport. We've got to make sure our economy starts to move. We've got to start boosting that economy to save jobs and create jobs because of the adverse effect it has on the households. And we've got to start then putting things in places in schools. So we've got to start looking at how do we get teachers to recognise early on in the education system that there might be things developing, not just putting probably a counsellor in place to look at it. We've got to really educate the teachers as well to make sure that they can recognise it early, and then we can look at dealing with the children. But we've also got to look at the elderly as well, who have been vastly affected by this, because let's face it, they've been locked up for a lot longer than many other people. And we've got to try and get them involved to access them and say, look, we need to give you services. We need to get you out of it. And in some respects, I look at my youngest lad has been on his PlayStation since the lockdown, so it's not really affected him. But my mother-in-law and my mother, it's massively affected them because they're not used to not going out. They're not used to seeing their friends or going to the coffee club. And that adverse effect on their mental health, we need to address all stages of it. It's not one plan fits all. We've got to look at the individuals, look at the groups, and see what we can best to get the message out there and get them the services provided. Fantastic.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Yes, I'm glad that your lad has been playing PlayStation. I've completed all kinds of videos. Completed Netflix, I completed Amazon Prime and Disney Plus, but I tried this new one called The News. It wasn't for me. So moving on, please, Simon Lepori, could you answer question 2 from Dr. Shirley for us?
All right. So the first thing, in Greater Manchester, the proportion of the budget allocated to mental health in 1920 was 12.8%, compared to the English average of 13.9%. So let's get up to the English average at least, and maybe exceed it in Greater Manchester with the control over the budget that we have. What do I see in the future? Well, I want a mental health service that supports people's right to be treated in the right place at the right time, but also helps practitioners provide service that's in the right place at the right time. And that involves a lot of community support work, and as well as inpatient acute support work as well. Our MP Munira Wilson has called for the government to appoint a Minister for Wellbeing, because mental health should have its own voice in government and in Parliament, as well as locally. And that's something that I think we can all get around, actually a package of wellbeing for Greater Manchester. I think that's it. I'll let everyone move on. I don't need to talk for 2 minutes on that. I think I was quite succinct.
Wonderful. Thanks, Simon. So then I would like to come to Melanie Horrocks, please, from the Green Party.
Thanks, Celia, and thank you, Dr. Shirley, for the question. I think in recognising that there are needs that we need to address with regards to treating mental health, I think we need to really be clear to acknowledge that actually promoting mental health isn't just about that treatment when people are in crisis or in need. It's about promoting conditions which allow good mental health to thrive. So at the heart of a lot of the policies that I've been put forward are those sorts of policies. So I've been talking about when we're looking at housing and housing shortages across the region, to approach housing with a make, do and mend approach, to look at empty housing, to look at addressing the social issues that come from areas where there is empty housing, be that crime, antisocial behaviour, drug use and drug policy, and to actually look to take those houses back, to redevelop them, and to reinvigorate them, to reinvigorate the communities that there are. And we know how important community has been through the lockdown and through COVID, and that's something that's at the heart of that policy. But it's also really important that people have access to green spaces, to nature, and to have the ability to be physically active. And my transport policy really addresses that in enabling people to move around Greater Manchester on an integrated transport system that links in active transport so that people can cycle and walk across Greater Manchester using the trams, using the buses at all times of the day to be able to get out into our green spaces, and also to be able to leave Greater Manchester and the city centres to be able to access those green spaces and be able to really make the most of our wonderful green spaces that we have within our region and on its borders. I think it's also really important that people should have the fear of financial poverty and the stress that comes with that taken away from them. And that's why I've said repeatedly that if elected mayor, I would ask for Greater Manchester to become a universal basic income trial zone, so that people don't have to worry about their basic needs being met, and that they can focus on looking after themselves and seeking just pleasure in the area they've got, the communities around them, and really focusing on not just fixing the problem at the end, but promoting all these policies that make good mental health an option, and that's something that's available to our communities within Greater Manchester.
Thank you, Melanie.
So thank you.
Thanks. We're going to move on to Andy Burnham, please, next from the Labour Party, to answer Shirley's question.
Thanks, Juliet, and thanks, Shirley. It's about the basics, I think, for everybody. And if you say, how do we promote a vision of good mental health in Greater Manchester, we've got to recognise that health, physical and mental, is built in homes and workplaces, or it's not. It's damaged in those places. And the reality is, too many people in Greater Manchester live such a precarious life because of their work circumstances that their mental health and well-being is basically taken from them. And it's because we've seen it in the pandemic, haven't we? People are in such an insecure position in the workplace that they can't take time out if they need to. And that's been the case with the physical virus, but it's also then completely damaging of their mental health as well. People do not have income security, therefore they don't have housing security. Because if they can't be certain what they're going to earn one week to the next, they are living a life on the edge all of the time, worrying about eviction as well, because obviously under the way no fault eviction works, and many people live in private rented. And that's the reality, I think, for far too many of our residents. They do not have the foundation of the basics beneath them. Melanie mentioned universal basic income, and I support that. But I've been really struck through my work on homelessness around housing first. We don't set people up for success in this country. We leave them sort of chasing the benefit system, always under pressure, always under stress. Housing first is a philosophy about giving people the basics, the foundation of the basics, so that then they can succeed and have a good life and have good mental health and well-being. So my vision starts with better work. So the Greater Manchester Good Employment Charter linked to all public procurement in Greater Manchester. And that Good Employment Charter is about a real living wage for everybody, no enforced 0 hours contracts, everybody supported to work flexibly to balance work and home. Beyond that, we will have a Greater Manchester Good Landlord Charter, better to regulate the private rented sector in Greater Manchester. So that for me is about building mental health. But then when you go into support and services, which is sort of later down the line, I think we have to recognise that it will need to be delivered differently. Younger people will need to access support in different ways, more immediately. We brought through some digital mental health support services during the pandemic, recognising this point. A number of them focused on young people. I was amazed in our survey of young people late last year that 6 out of 10 of the people questioned, 7,000 year 10s in Greater Manchester, 6 out of 10 were aware of Couth, which is one of those services. That is telling us very much that young people both are looking for services and they want those instant support services. And I think we need to sort of build out from that and build out something much better. So there's so much to say, so I don't want to overspeak, but I'll just finish on this point. The vision has got to be about everyday mental health and well-being. And it's about having a health service that promotes that. And when people go to their GP, they can instantly be referred to something that will help with their immediate mental health needs and their well-being. That is quite a big change, but I think it's a change we now need to bring through, and Greater Manchester is well placed to bring it through. We call it social prescribing, and that's to medicalise it, and we shouldn't call it that. I'm talking about a live well service in all 10 of our boroughs, where we work with our colleagues in the voluntary sector to structure the support that people need on an ongoing daily basis. And that's the vision in my manifesto, a live well service in Greater Manchester, organised through primary care, but delivered through our colleagues in the voluntary and community sector. And I think that's a powerful vision, recognising that our residents live with levels of insecurity every single day that are far too high.
Thank you, Andy. I'm going to go back to Dr. Shirley McDonald, please. Dr. Shirley, if you could find the mute button to unmute yourself, that'd be fantastic. So I want to know, do you feel like that was satisfactory answers to your question of what is the vision for a mentally healthy Greater Manchester and how would this be achieved? Are you satisfied with those answers?
Yeah, I think they were fair answers. I think it's a huge task anyway, to address what is actually going on in mental health. For people in every sector, from the elderly who have been isolated in care homes, to their families who have suffered and struggled not seeing them, to children and young people who are undiagnosed in schools. They've suffered through isolation in the pandemic. It's a huge ask, but I agree with Andy in that I think to tackle it through primary care services and the voluntary sector, that is a way forward, because there's lots of things we need to address. It's not an easy ask, but yeah, I think the panelists have done really well in pushing forward, to me, their ideas about what a mentally healthy Greater Manchester will look like. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shirley. We're actually going to come to somebody who's asked a question in the Zoom chat, just to keep our panellists on their toes, because there was a great response to Emma Haggerston's question. So Emma, if you could reach your unmute button and unmute yourself. Emma Haggerston has a fantastic question that she'd like to field to the panellists, please. Emma.
Hi, yeah, so is this the one about addiction? I just wanted to check, because I put a couple in the chat.
Let's start with that one, and we'll probably come back to you later on, perhaps.
Perfect. Yeah. So what can be done to compassionately treat addiction without recourse to the police, criminalisation and incarceration?
Thank you, Emma. Yes, that had a wonderful response in the chat. Everybody's saying it's a brilliant question. I completely personally agree. So we're going to, this time, come to, let's go with Simon Lepori first, please.
Well, my party's policy on drugs is quite well known. I think cannabis needs decriminalised, and I sign up to that as a healthcare professional. It does there are long-term effects and long-term problems, but we need to stop criminalising drug addicts, because if you're criminalising them, you're not treating them. And we need to treat drug addicts as we need to treat them so they can recover and become part of society again. And I think, police can be a little heavy-handed, but remember, people are going into prison and they're coming out addicts there as well. They're not, even if they're going in as addicts, they're not getting cured in prison. Drugs are still filtering into prison. So, I'm an advocate of treatment over incarceration. I'm an advocate of decriminalisation. And I mean, I would probably go further than some of my colleagues in the Liberal Democrats in terms of drugs. It's not something that I'm ashamed of saying. But I think we need to get real about drugs, because the 40-year war on drugs has failed. There are more people in prison not getting treatment, not having their lives ruined through a penal and justice system that isn't dealing with the addiction. They're just incarcerating, and they're punishing without treating. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. We're going to come to Melanie Horrocks next, please, from the Green Party.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you, Emma, for that question. It's one that's actually very close to me, because I have worked for a great number of years within Greater Manchester I'm not presently, but I have as a criminal defence lawyer. And so I have seen firsthand what criminalising addicts actually means. And I've stood in court with clients who have been facing sort of custodial sentences for stealing. It shows how long ago this particular story is. 2 VHS tapes and a packet of bacon. And they were looking at going into prison, and there was no mention then of drug treatment orders and sort of ongoing addressing the issue that had led to that sort of criminality. And the criminality was stealing to buy drugs. I've also gone with clients into drug treatment and testing centres and seen even back in the day how people were being treated, and the fact that many years ago the treatment for people coming off heroin had been reduced by half, even though all the sort of medical evidence proved that you couldn't become treated and come off heroin addiction within 2 weeks. 4 weeks was the absolute bare minimum, and Greater Manchester was trying to treat within 2 weeks, and people were being provided with drugs that would stop their body processing heroin, allow them to move on to methadone when they weren't clear, and people were being hospitalized as a result of that. So I have seen the really harsh end of what it means to criminalize addiction. So I'm a very big sort of fan and very big promoter of my own policy, party's policy on drugs and what we need to do with them. And I absolutely agree with the position that we need to actually have cannabis available on the NHS for all users. And I think that we need to look very seriously at what drugs are criminalised and what drug treatment and testing there is, and how we support people with addictions. And removing the criminality and the criminal element around addiction is the really, really clear first step.
Thank you, Melanie. I think we'll get...
So thank you, Emma.
Thank you very much, Melanie. Well, next we're going to come to Andy Burnham, please, for the Labour Party.
Well, can I just say I very much recognise the expertise that Simon and Mel have in this area, and I listen carefully and agree with lots of what they've said. I just want to go back to the last mayoral election in 2017, because something was relevant then, Emma, that is in my answer to your question, and that was the rising crisis we had in the number of people sleeping rough at that time, linked to the problems with spice on the streets. That was by far and away the dominant issue of the last mayoral election campaign. Greater Manchester wasn't where it needed to be at all on any of this. There wasn't a response really to that growing humanitarian crisis on our streets, and GMP's approach wasn't knitted in. There was a lack of support for people, and then there was an enforcement approach, and it was bad, and that's the context in which I came in as mayor. So firstly, we had to put in place support for people, give people somewhere to go, because there wasn't somewhere to go at that time. And then we had to go through a process of talking to GMP about saying, well, start with an assertive but supportive approach for people, give them something, offer people something, as opposed to just throwing a fixed penalty notice. And we did. We created something called the Street Engagement Hub, and it's a really successful model. It was originally provided out of a prison service building in Cheetham Hill. It's now at the Mustard Tree. And basically what it is a multi-agency service for people who, instead of being criminalised, get a range of support from different agencies in the same setting, including a script, by the way, so that when they can get support in terms of managing their addiction. And that has got to be the way to go. But just to finish, Juliet, there's one issue here that isn't working within the system, and it does need to be fixed. The next mayor needs to fix it. Hopefully that will be me, but whoever it is, this next mayor does need to fix this. And that is the mixed referral route to the more intensive support that people might need in terms of recovery stroke detoxification. So we've got a really leading unit in Greater Manchester called the Chapman Barker unit on the Prestwich site. It's easy to access if you're being referred from an NHS route, from an NHS setting, hospital, acute setting. Our councils are not funded they should be referring lots of people who are struggling to maintain tenancies, etc., but the public health budget simply doesn't support their use. Consequently, the unit is at times underutilised, and yet the support they provide can absolutely turn lives around. So I think we need a fix, actually, to use the capacity that is there in the Chapman Barker unit to offer a recovery pathway to more people, because I've been there. The results are hugely impressive, and I think the approach generally to people in crisis in Greater Manchester should always be supportive first, give people the best possible support we can to turn lives around, rather than going down a criminalisation or enforcement route. Nobody in our city region under my leadership, and I said this clearly, should be criminalised for the lack of a home, and then perhaps the addiction and the other problems that may come as a result of that.
Thank you, Andy. And Stephen Morris from the English Democrats, could you please answer this question as well?
Yeah, the English Democrats and my views are to do with, like what Simon's already said, is we need to look at legalising certain drugs via prescription, cannabis, for example. But what you've got to look at is what's the root cause of people turning to addiction. We've got to try and address that. At the moment, we're in a vicious circle. People turn probably to addiction, to drugs, as a coping mechanism for some pain that they're not being able to deal with in other issues. So we've got to try and address that, but we can't criminalise them. And bearing in mind, Andy's mentioned GMP quite a few times, but GMP is currently under special measures, which has spiralled downwards under his mayoralty. And he's just mentioned about something that really needs to be addressed as a matter of urgency. Well, he's had 4 years to do something. So the urgency is to turn around what's been failing currently. But we need to address the individual's root cause. We need to make sure and break this vicious cycle that's been going on, because it cannot continue. And that means getting certain drugs legalised, getting the people the treatment, getting them the coping mechanism they can. But it's getting someday treatment. It's not a short-term fix. They need long-term treatment. And that's what we need to give them, because some can go on for decades to turn it around. But ultimately, we've got to be sure that we're a caring region. We've got to show that we are leading the front in tackling this in ways that other areas have not been done. And we have to break this vicious cycle. We keep voting for the same people, you still keep getting the same results. And that's 4 years of urgency in dealing with mental health.
Thank you, Stephen. Next, we have a question from Eileen Steed. Eileen, can you please do the epic lean over and unmute yourself and pose your question to our panelists, please? Eileen Steed.
Of course. Hi, can you see me?
We can see and hear you, which is exceptional work. Congratulations, Eileen.
Okay, thank you. My question is, I work with people, who have autism, and I work for a mental health charity, and I'd like to ask, what plans have you got in supporting, autistic people, the carers and the families, who are generally unrepresented, and I just want to know, what the plans are for the future for supporting, within Greater Manchester.
Thank you, Eileen. We'll go to Melanie first. Melanie Horrocks from the Green Party.
Thank you, and thank you, Eileen, for that question. I think that we need to sort of start really at the beginning, and we need to look at what we're doing within schools. My fiance is a Senko within a primary school, and I know full well the problems that he faces. I've also really just spent a lot of time reading his essays. He's just been qualifying, he's been doing his masters, and I've read a lot of reports into autism. That was his specialism, and reading his essays. So I understand just how poor the services can be. And I know from friends with children with autism and that they're on the spectrum, just how hard it can be to access any kind of support and to actually get through the sort of hoops that are put in place. So I think it's really key to make sure that there is some amazing support out there to support families with children going through diagnosis, but it's just not well known. And I think that actually a really key role, while I can't necessarily influence how the EHCP system works with, because that is outside of the powers of the mayor, actually providing support and providing signposting and making sure that those families at a really early stage get proper provision and get the support they need is really key. And I think part of that is also to recognise the problem that women and girls have in being diagnosed with autism. That's a well-known issue within those dealing with people on the autism spectrum. And I think that actually education and promotion, again, to make it clear that women and girls do do experience autism, and that needs to be addressed. Once we've got that in hand, we then need to look at what services we've got in place. There is now more and more women from sort of in their 30s and 40s who are finally being diagnosed, but that is widespread, and that we need to support that, and we need to make sure that women who have struggled throughout their lives and have got to being in their 30s and their 40s before they approach diagnosis now have the full support that they need, and also just a narrative for them to understand why they have been in the situations they've been, where the help has lacked, and actually what they can do moving forward. And we really just must, within our communities, celebrate neurodiversity. We really just must not make autism and any other neurological condition something that is a label when it's not needed. It's something to really celebrate, and it's, we've just got to do better when it comes to autism. And I think it's something I truly understand and have very personal support to make sure I get it right. So hopefully that would give you some reassurance.
Thank you, Melanie. Next, we're coming to Andy Burnham from the Labour Party.
Well, you're right, Eileen. Things are nowhere near good enough. And I think Mel was just making this point. And I say that with feeling, because as Health Secretary, just over 10 years ago, I brought through the first national autism strategy in early 2010. I was thinking about it recently, actually, because the MP who brought forward a private members bill to create the requirement for that strategy, Cheryl Gillen, she died recently, but she and I worked quite a lot on this. And I think what I remember from back then is just how shocked I was. I'll be honest with you, that experience of writing the strategy opened my eyes, because when I was Health Secretary, they were asking me to sign it off quickly, and I wouldn't do it because I need to, and I consulted with parents in Lee about the reality of it and young people, and it was shocking how low people's understanding was and the lack of services. Now, I think things have moved on a bit, but it's not enough, nowhere near enough. So I came in 2017, and I said I wanted an autism-friendly Greater Manchester, and I stand by that. We had an autism summit. We've had a lot of engagement going on, and we are currently working on updating the autism strategy, and it'll be coming out next year, 2022. And there's a lot of work going on with that at the moment. It is about a range of things, isn't it? It's about employment support for people, because that isn't there, and it should be there, because people can work with often a little bit of support. It is about all of the issues with schools and SEN, as Mel rightly said. It's also about housing, and I know a lot of parents get very anxious about the future of, when people hit that kind of adult age. What if they're not allowed to support anymore? What is the provision for people with autism, autistic people, I should say? What is the ongoing supporting housing provision? I don't think we've answered that question, and the strategy next year needs to answer that question. So I'll just finish by saying this, I'm still committed, I'm very committed actually to an autism-friendly Greater Manchester. That doesn't just mean we get businesses and everywhere to think about autistic people and the delivery of their services, and public services should always have an autism champion, if you like, available for people to speak to, particularly in a police setting or in a DWP setting. But I think it's also about raising everyone's understanding of that. That makes you autism friendly, I think, as a city region, when everyone has a better understanding of autism. And that's what we should carry on working towards. So, it's not where it needs to be. And I say that with a real twinge of regret, actually, because I remember in 2010 thinking, wow, this is going to transform things. And let's be honest, it hasn't. And we need to sort of really lift our ambitions for autistic people.
Thank you, Andy. Next, we're coming to Stephen Morris from the English Democrats, please.
Yeah, I first came across issues to do with autism when I became General Secretary of the Union. And I was appalled at what I saw on how they were being not treated fairly. It wasn't being treated as you recognise. And I even dealt with one case where the local authorities said they weren't autistic enough. And I was absolutely appalled because this person couldn't eat, feed themselves, dress themselves, wasn't allowed out on their own. And me, being not medical, knew that that must be serious. I didn't need a qualification to say that's serious, you know. And I'm currently dealing with another case, and I've been quite appalled at the way the public services in some areas, not all of them, because a lot of them do a really great job, but there's still a lot of education to be put out there to people on recognising it and actually treating them fairly and with dignity. You know, I've been absolutely appalled at what's been going on. So we need to really make sure that our public services within Greater Manchester, first and foremost, are the ones who are recognising it and dealing with it. And we need to pass it on to businesses. We need to make sure they're at the forefront of it. And just to go back to a point that Andy mentioned about him being health secretary, I haven't forgotten about you starting the privatisation of an NHS hospital, trying to sell it off. And I haven't forgotten about the mid-staff crisis with all the child deaths. And people should not forget that. Your time in office was not good then, and it's not been good now. And people should look that up and not forget.
Thank you, Stephen. Moving on.
Chance to reply to some of those things at some point, Julia. Maybe not now, but
maybe not now, Andy. But
well,
maybe not now.
I don't think candidates can make untruthful statements without them being corrected.
That is
look it up. All I say is just Google it. You can chuck it up. Andy Burnham, Mid-Staffs Hospital. Very straightforward.
Stephen and Andy, I will give Andy a chance to respond later, but right now we've had so much engagement for our amazing audience that we really need to crack on right now. But Andy, I do hear your point, and Stephen, I hear your point. We will come back to this. But before we do, and very importantly, we want to hear Simon Lepori's answer to this very important question posed by Eileen.
Thank you very much, Julia, and thank you, Eileen. Autism's really, it's one of those subjects, and I think, Mel's talked about education and the funding in education, and he's talking about normalising it, and that's right. We need to normalise it because, every individual should be supported to achieve their potential, whether they're neurodivergent or neurotypical, full stop. There shouldn't be a mixture in that. It should just be a full stop statement. I've got a friend actually who's waited for an ADHD. No, I've not done that right. ADHD diagnosis, and he still hasn't got it. I mean, he's waited, I think, 18 months plus now. And he's, I'm 40, he's 42, 43. But he didn't get the support when he was a child. And I remember when I was at school, and I look back now and I remember friends that I went to primary school with, and even in secondary school, and they were never diagnosed. And you can look back now and you think, how are they doing in society? And one of the shocking things is some of them are in prison because they've ended up down that route because they were abandoned by society. And so the one thing that I would say coming out of it in Greater Manchester, we need to not abandon anyone, whatever their age, who has or suspects they have autism. And they need to be treated with respect and kindness. And if they've committed a crime, as long as it's not a non-violent crime, we need to be able to manage them as people and not as any condition they may have, so they can get the help and support they need to be part of our city region. And I think, everything else has been covered with everyone else, but that's my takeaway from the whole thing. But thank you very much.
Thank you. Eileen, can I just quickly come back to you? Are you satisfied with those answers?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for answering that. Thank
you, Eileen. Lovely. We're going to move on to our next question, question 3, which comes from the BACP member, Louise Tyler. Louise, can you please do that very important unmute movement, please, and pose your question?
How would you, as Mayor, recognise and address the vital importance of counselling and psychotherapy services in treating those with mental health issues?
Thank you very much, Louise. So firstly, I'd like to come to Andy Burnham from the Labour Party on this question.
Thank you, Louise. Again, I'm going to go back to my time in government. I brought through the IAP services. I funded them as Chief Secretary, and then I implemented them as Health Secretary. I worked with Richard Layard on that. And yeah, that was, again, a real journey of understanding for me about how that support wasn't provided routinely across the system. And I think it's been a real success, actually, the IAP program. The only problem is, of course, there isn't enough of it, and it isn't prioritized enough within the system. And I think this should be prioritized now for all the reasons that we're talking about tonight. Mental health has risen up the agenda. People are struggling more and more. They want access to therapists, to counselling, to services, and the waiting times are too long. And often the damage is done in that period as people are waiting. So we need to get towards a situation where we can almost have instant access to those services, don't we? That should be our goal. And that means correctly prioritizing mental health within the NHS. I think, as Simon was saying before, I think the nature of life now demands it. And it is part of a live well service. You know, that's the way I see it, you know, that we have those alternatives to medication, or it might be that people take some antidepressants and use those services, but let's not over focus on the medication at times. We need to move people to ongoing support. So that's my answer. Julia, I'm going to take the opportunity. I'm sorry to correct what Stephen said. It's only right and proper that I get the chance to do that. Number one, everything on the internet, Stephen, isn't true. I just need to tell you. Andrew Lansley privatised that hospital in 2011. That is a fact, and you need to look that up. As Health Secretary, I introduced a policy of NHS preferred provider, which was to prioritise the public NHS. That is a fact. Number two, the Healthcare Commission's report into mid-staffs came out in 2008. I was not made Health Secretary until 2009. I brought in Sir Robert Francis to conduct an independent inquiry into mid-staffs. Those are the facts. I just had to put them on the
Juliet, I would need to respond to that later on, because it's been
it's disrespectful
limited with
to
the
reflect on
truth.
autism, Stephen, to make those points.
Stephen and
I've answered
Andy,
your points. That's it.
Stephen and Andy, at this point, I will not accept any more conversation about this. We are here to honour our audience's interest in mental health. I really appreciate you having that discourse there, and I hope that we can draw a line under it, because our audience are here to hear your answers focused on mental health. And right now, we are going to focus on Louise's very important question. So we are going to now come to Melanie Horrocks from the Green Party to answer this question.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you, Louise. It's a really important question. I think that the starting point is that we tell people who have got mental health concerns that they need to ask for help. And it takes so much, it takes so very much for some people to actually ask for help. And then when they finally build up the courage and the ability and the strength to do that, the help isn't there. There are hoops to jump through. There is services not available. There are waiting lists. And all of those things contribute to people either feeling let down and feeling like they don't want to engage, or they no longer can because the service wasn't available to them, or they sit and wait, but actually over the time that they're waiting, their problems get worse and harder for them to cope with, and they become worse and more difficult for therapists to treat. So actually we need to have a system, and Andy is right, when someone says I need help, that the help is available. But also as part of that, we need to acknowledge that different forms of treatment don't work for everyone. We need to have a variety of treatments so that people can actually get help that works for them, and that recognises the ability to say, this type of therapy isn't working, but I can recommend you to try this one. And there is a straightforward transfer between those services that are offered. And really making sure that the treatment that's offered is very patient-centred is really very key. And the second part is, and I've experienced this when I've been sent for help and support with postnatal depression, is that you get a limited number of sessions quite often. In my case, on one occasion, it was 6. There is no way that you can build up a good therapeutic relationship with the person who is treating you in 6 sessions. And I came away from that first experience thinking that actually any form of counselling and therapy didn't work, because it didn't work for me, because I was set up to fail in that instance, and my counsellor was set up to be seen as a failure because of that short engagement period. So I think it's really key that we don't just offer a service, but we offer the service that is needed, and we allow people to develop a sensible relationship and an ongoing relationship with therapists to enable them to get the best out of those services. And if we just let people come in short time, they will feel abandoned, they won't come back, and they won't continue to get the help. And I think that is such a crucial part of mental health service provision. So thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. We're going to move on to Simon Lepori, please, your answer.
No, thanks for that. I actually want to talk about the innovations that have happened, because I think my other two candidates have spoken about things that I would have spoken about too. I think we are in agreement on that, and it's a great question, Louise. In Manchester, we've got things like Shout. So it's a confidential 24/7 tech service operated by trained crisis volunteers who chat using text, and it's things like that we need to bring into the service and actually fund and give them support to do what they do. We know there is a backlog of patients who weren't suitable for non-face-to-face interventions. They're still at home. They've had, sporadic care over the past 12 months. But we also know there's a rising demand for therapy in Greater Manchester as a result of the pandemic, but even before that. So utilising those other services and those voluntary services from the voluntary sector to actually feed in and support the therapy teams around Greater Manchester is something that we really need to get a grip on and really accept, as we're not competing, we're actually supporting one another to get the best outcomes for the public. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. So we're going to come to Stephen Morris now, and Stephen, I would like to remind you to please keep your answer related to the question that's been posed.
Yes. Thank you. Although we're talking about health, so it's all related. How do we recognise it? Well, we're already recognising there's an issue now. We're having this debate, we're discussing it, but we've got to take it one step further. We've got to now stop talking, we've got to make action, and we've got to start with it. And we've got to start opening up services, face-to-face services. Therapeutic relationship between the counsellor and the person who's requiring that service needs to be face-to-face. It's not the same when it's on Zoom. Zoom's okay for certain things, but we've got to start opening things up. We've got to start making sure them services are there and highlighting where you can go to, that these services are not closed. They're open for business, and that you can come here and get them. And we need to advertise that. And the Mayor's office is a very powerful voice. It's can be very vocal in our area. And that Mayor should be highlighting these, every opportunity they've got, saying, if you've got issues regarding mental health, these are the services we're providing. Please go there. We're working to do all the other things in the background, but if you need immediate help, we need to have a list and say this and advertise them. This is where you go to. This is where you get treated. But we need to highlight the individual issues, but we need to make sure that the person is allowed out of their house and can go and get it. We've got to provide that service. Zoom is not the way forward on this kind of treatment.
Thank you, Stephen. Jill, we're going to come to you next because I can see that there's lots of people chatting away in the chat. I'd love to ask you and check in with you, Jill. What have people been saying, and are there any questions at this point?
Well, lots on the chat, as you say. I think the focus on families, young people, tomorrow's generation is really big. What is the lasting impact going to be on Greater Manchester? Donna Kelly talks about the tsunami on young people's mental health. And I think, let's all think about that going forward. Similar message from Ben, excuse me if I get this wrong, Apaponsa, again on the impact. Going back to the linking it all together, the impact on homes, environments, crime, other public services. I think that's another, how we all join up. Another question that Emma Haggerston made was, of course, the increase in domestic violence and abuse within the home, because we spent so much time in the home. And I think that's an interesting one for all the mayoral candidates to be aware of. But again, the impact on the police, services as well. Maria Worthington asks, how will the mayor better support housing providers to provide supportive environments, and certainly for the people in housing, to reduce pressure on staff. Again, the link between mental health and just living and the services we get. John Kemp from the Alzheimer's Society talks again, very important part of the issue of Alzheimer's and dementia, and the impact again on society and social care staff and the support. Jeremy Clark asks a really good question. We do have devolution in Greater Manchester. How do we get that mental health ambition and make Devo work and deliver more personalised support and do more, because we have those powers, and put mental health back up there. Jill Brennan, I think, says, really, I'm paraphrasing, but what does success look like, today or tomorrow, in 5 years' time, when you're back at the ballot box? How will you measure, your impact on, let's call it the tsunami of mental health? How are you going to measure that success and evaluation? And Ola Tandy talks about how can we actually reduce waiting times, for assessments and access to support. Obviously it's a long time coming. Patsy Hodson, I'll just quickly mention you, because very optimistically talking about what schools and education can do, and points out that there's a really good initiatives in I think 17 North Manchester schools, where you're getting into the school and really educating people and supporting young people. So gone full circle. There's loads and loads more in there, Juliet. But yeah, you can see it's a really lively topic and debate, and some food for thought for the candidates there.
Thank you so much, Jill. And yes, actually, because there is so much to get through, we've only got 15 minutes left. I'm going to have to ask our candidates to keep their answers as succinct as possible. We're going to have to limit you to 1 minute maximum for your answers from now on, please. So given everything that Jill's just highlighted from all of those watching and listening to our evening this evening, this question, it links to all of that. It's how mental health services in general, and counselling and psychotherapy in particular, should be fairly and fully resourced. For example, as Mayor, the audience would like to know, how would you ensure these services in the third sector get a fair share of Greater Manchester's £6 billion health and social care budget? I'm going to come to Melanie Horrocks first.
Thank you, and thank you. Thank you, Juliet. I think what's really important is we must keep absolutely the focus of all our discussions around funding, is that there has got to be the parity of esteem between mental health provision and physical health services. And it really has got to be, and it's the same as I answered in the last one, we just can't make a promotional sticking plaster to say we're supporting mental health and have a public information campaign without properly funding the services that we need. And that's the key, is we've just got to make sure, and I would make sure and attribute a budget to make sure that people had access to those services that they need. But it also comes into where I started this evening's hustings, to say we just need to make improvements across the city region, so that actually people have got access to green space, have got access to good housing, to good transport, to good jobs, to a universal basic income that would enable them to have some of those stresses and some of those pressures relieved on them, in the hope that we can reduce the requirement to provide those services. And getting those two elements in balance is absolutely the key to where I would be taking the...
Thank you very much, Melanie. Coming to Stephen Morris next, please.
So, as Mayor, it's one of my top priorities, so the funding will be there. At the moment, we cannot we've got to break this cycle. And mental health, like I said right from the very beginning, we've got to break the cycle of what's been going on. We cannot continue the way we've been going. And we've got to put the funding there. It's got to be a priority because there's so much runs from it. So much runs from addressing the mental health issues. And it's not just how do we make sure the mental health funding is there. We've got to address all the other points. We've got to address the public transport. We've got to address how people feel safe in our communities, address the issues with the police. So it's a multi-pronged approach. And under the mayoralty, then the funding will be put there because it's one of my priorities. It's got to be done there. And if it's not done, if we do not see vast improvement as an elected mayor, then next election you just vote us out, don't you? It's that simple. But because I deal with people on a daily basis,
60 seconds, Stephen, please.
On an individual basis, it's at the top of my priorities to fund.
Thank you, Stephen. Coming to Simon Lepori next.
Thanks so much. Well, I said at the beginning, we're as a proportion of our budget in 1920, we were below the England average. We need to get up to that 13.9%, if not higher. And we need to set that as a standard of never dropping below the average for England. And I mean, so that's my challenge to all the other candidates, committing to that at least. But you look at Greater Manchester's health and social care structure. I mean, there's 12 CCGs, there's 14 acute trusts, 450 dental surgeries, 700 community pharmacies. It's humongous, 10 local authorities, all competing, all struggling to provide services. They need streamlined and they need joined up. So we're not paying for X amount of managers. We're actually paying for less managers so we can have more money into frontline services and frontline support services.
That's 60 seconds. Sorry, Simon, but that is 60 seconds.
Oh, I've got 60 seconds. No,
I'm
done.
I'm going to be very strict from now on. So coming to Andy on this question, and again, 60 seconds, please, Andy.
Yeah, so I don't disagree with Simon. We do need to get up to that level. So the question is how is the question. It's about prioritising mental health when there are uplifts, and that's exactly what we did in 2017. I said I would prioritise mental health in 2017, and then when we had an uplift, £134 million went into mental health in Greater Manchester in 2017. The majority of it going to children and young people's mental health services, because if mental health's the poor relation, CAMS is the poor relation of the poor relation, and we put that money in. It paid for innovative schemes of the kind that Jill was mentioning. So it was using devolution, to answer a different question, to provide things differently. We had a program called Mentally Healthy Schools, and I'm very proud of that actually, because it changed the way we were thinking about and delivering mental health, working through 42nd Street. Simone was on the chat before, and others, and that's been fantastic. How do we keep driving the improvement? You shine a spotlight. We are the first place in the country that has published waiting times for children's access to mental health services.
60 seconds, Andy. Can you wrap it up?
Exposes the need, and that's how you keep driving up the investment. A lot more to say on that as well.
There's so much to say, and we've got so many questions still to get through. Thank you very much to all the candidates on that question. We're going to come to the wonderful Jules Roberts, who's on the call and has a supplementary question. We're going to have to keep these answers very brief. So, Jules, could you do that wonderful reach and unmute yourself, please?
Thank you. As proud Mancunians with a small wellness business, how can we get involved in building back better mental health services in Greater Manchester?
Great. We're going to come to Andy Burnham first, please.
That's what I was saying, Jules, about a live well service. That's what I want social prescribing to become. So what I mean by that is, in all 10 of our boroughs, a structured service that is about the bereavement counselling, the physical activity referral, a range of activities that are provided by partners in the voluntary sector, not-for-profit, independent sector if need be, doesn't matter. You know, we need a range of services provided. When that money went into mental health in 2017, it was very interesting that Salford took their budget and delivered the entire service that they commissioned through the voluntary sector. And that to me said there's something changing a little bit here in the NHS's mentality about how it partners with organisations who can better reach people with everyday informal support. So there's more to build on, but that's how we'll do it. I want a structured live well service in all 10 of our boroughs so that people go to their GP They can be referred for
60
support
seconds.
of that kind as instantly as getting a prescription for medication. That's when we're making a difference.
Thank you, Andy. We're going to come to Melanie next, please. Melanie Horrocks.
Thank you, and thank you, Joyce, for the question. I think part of what we need to look at within Greater Manchester is actually what services we're providing. And I've talked obviously about the key elements of making sure people get addressed to the right sort of counsellor, but also what can we do other than just providing counselling and psychotherapy sessions. And there are some amazing projects running up and down the country that are running all sorts of different mental health focused, but not direct counselling services. And I think that that is something we really very much need to explore. So we've got amazing green spaces. I want to promote them. Let's see what we can run in those spaces, such as horticultural provision. Get people out, get people experiencing the exact things that I've talked about, where they're in groups, they're being supported, they're having conversations, they're out of any sort of isolation, but they're doing something very, very positive, but that is supported by mental health experts to make sure there is an ongoing support and provision. Sorry, Juliet, thank you.
That's 60 seconds. Thank you very much. Next, we're going to come to Stephen Morris.
Yeah, we've already mentioned about how we need to link up all the sectors and everything in. But the issue is how would you, as a Bradman Union, get involved? Well, get involved with the Mayor's office. Come forward, meet us, tell us what your concerns are, how we can deal with it directly. The door's open. Please come and see us if elected. You know, you're the specialist. You know what is needed. If elected, come and see me, and then we'll work together to address it.
Thank you, Stephen. And Simon Lepori, please.
Thanks. So, along the same lines as everyone else, really, it's get involved and come and see us and ask us. What I'm a big proponent of is community-based solutions and localized solutions. So prevention is better than cure. And I say that as a stream that runs through all healthcare. And we've got a police officer in every ward. I want to see a social worker, a youth worker, a mental health nurse, a district nurse in every ward or every community to actually work with teachers and business and people like yourself to actually build that support network in our local communities again. We used to have it years ago. We need it back. And people need to feel they can go somewhere locally to get some help before they become acute, before they end up having to get more acute services.
And that's 60 seconds. Thank you very much, Simon Lepori. We are coming close to the end of the time, so we've got time for one more question. I'm going to amalgamate a few questions into one, which is Caroline Ainsworth question. I'm going to pair with a question that I've posed myself. So Caroline and I, we're telepathically linked now. There's been a lot of talk in the chat as well about putting counsellors into schools to help with social anxiety issues after the pandemic. And this links to a question that I have, which is that I get asked very often why I don't perform more in schools. I also run mental health workshops for schools, colleges and workplaces, and I've performed comedy shows about my mental health and answer Q&As in some schools who can afford it, but there is not the funding out there from the government to afford to get people like me to come into schools. So we want to know, what will you do in terms of schools and in terms of counselling and better funding for people like me to come in to work with those schools on an ongoing basis, not just a one-off. So we're going to come firstly to, I believe, let's go for Stephen Morris first, please.
Well, again, it goes back to what we've already said. We need a multi-pronged approach to it all. And I already mentioned earlier, it's not just about putting a counsellor in school, but that we need to get the teachers to be the eyes and ears of things that are developing. Because if you put one counsellor in a school, then obviously they're going to be tied up maybe dealing with people not being in the classroom, not being picking up on things. They'll be dealing with their role of counselling and giving guidance and advice to the students. But the teachers are the eyes and the ears. So having a counsellor is great, but we need that eyes and ears in the classroom to pass that information on. And that would be my concern. I don't just want a counsellor there. I want them to be looking and developing the teachers to recognise it, and therefore we can address it sooner.
Thank you. Coming to Melanie Horrocks next.
Thank you, Julia. I'm going to disagree with Stephen slightly. I don't think that the responsibility for dealing with children's mental health should rest on teachers. They are not qualified. They are amazing. They do an amazing job in recognising problems, but they are not the specialist help that a lot of children need. And a lot of children coming out of the pandemic need very specialist support. So I think counsellors in schools is a starting point, but actually we need to look at the fact that children from the most deprived areas will often have great difficulty in accessing that even within schools. We need to look at what else can we provide. And again, similar to the question that I answered for Jules about the community projects, that's where we need to look at the funding. So are we able to provide youth groups, social activities, sporting facilities where there is just ongoing engagement and ongoing support for our young people, rather than just giving a sticking plaster answer. So thank you.
Melanie, thank you. We're coming to Andy Burnham next, please.
Thank you, Juliet, and thank you for the question. As I said before, we've done it through our Mentally Healthy Schools programme. So it didn't go to every school, but it went to a large number of schools, around 75, I think, across Greater Manchester. And the feedback was that it was really valuable. 42nd Street did a fantastic job. I think there was Place to Be were involved as well. There were other partners involved in it. So the question is how to make it sustainable, because we ran it as a pilot. And this is where the challenge comes in, because education funding is separate to the GMCA budget and the Health and Care Partnership. What we would need to do is create a funding arrangement working schools and the NHS together. And that is about, I'm afraid, persuading head teachers to put more of a value on this. I don't think it is being correctly prioritised within education. If you go back to when we were in government, there was something called social and emotional aspects of learning, the SEAL programme. And I think that disappeared in the Gove era, and we need to get it back into schools. And
Thank you, Andy.
That is about the Mayor bringing schools together, co-funding counselling in schools.
Thank you, Andy. That's 60 seconds. So Simon Lepori, please, next.
Yeah, thanks. I think we're all on the same page. You know, teachers can't be counsellors, just in the same breath that police officers can't be social workers. You have to have a multi-disciplinary team to actually serve a community. So I go back to my point of actually building those multidisciplinary teams in a local community that can actually liaise with head teachers, go into schools and actually train and teach and show support for kids and teachers as well, because a lot of the time some teachers don't even see the triggers around them because they're so concentrated on what they're doing. So I do go back to that. I mean, to come back to what Andy said, 4 years ago, I worked on Jane Brophy's campaign, and I've already mentioned this at another hustings. We were told then about the health and social care budget of 6.2 billion was too low. Greater Manchester needed at least 10 billion to survive and build.
Simon, I'll need to curtail you, unfortunately, because we are coming up to the last final minutes of this. No, I really appreciate your enthusiasm, but for your closing statements, I'm going to have to pose quite a creative challenge to you, given the time limit. You have 5 words, please, just 5 words to sum up your policy for mental health in Greater Manchester. I will be coming firstly to Andy Burnham.
Everyday, preventative, mental health and well-being. That's about 6, 7.
So I put you on the spot being first, so that's I will take that. Okay, let's come next to Stephen Morris.
We need change of approach.
That is 5 words. Excellent. Come to Simon Lepori next, please.
Putting people first every time, everywhere.
Lovely, well done. And finally, Melanie Horrocks, please.
Real solutions, not sticking plasters.
I mean, I'm loving the creativity from all of you. Thank you so much for your time. It has been such a lively, engaging debate. I'm so grateful for all of you, the candidates, being here and really engaging with, as you can tell, a subject very close to my heart. Thank you so much to all of the attendees. All of your amazing questions is the reason why we are so tight on time. And that fills me with great hope for the future, because now that there's this many people caring about mental health and knowing that mental health is actually a part of health, I'm very, very hopeful and happy for people in the future not to feel as alone as I used to. So I thank you very much, and please do vote next month. We are going to also say thank you very much to everybody for the discussion, and please thank you for being. I'm just saying thank you. I'm just grateful. I'm just grateful, really. And I'd like to hand over to Jill. Thank you so much for everybody for inviting me to be to chair this hustings. It's been an absolute honour, and I really hope that you have a fantastic few weeks and get through the next few weeks of the pandemic and lockdown. Jill, thank you.
Yeah, and thanks very much, Juliet. You chaired that brilliantly. I think we could have carried on all night. It's actually going dark outside. So can I just wish you a very good evening and good luck, everyone. I think whatever we have really talked around a very important issue for so many people, and a big issue. We do need to build back better mental health in Greater Manchester. So thank you again, Juliet, for being such a fantastic chair.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you. And very final thanks, and the most important thanks really have to go to the BACP. They are not only the reason that we're all here tonight, but also they were how I found my therapist. So thank you, BACP, for existing. I really appreciate that. Oh, Nat, I'm sorry to say that Natalie, I like your thinking. Can we vote for Juliet for mayor, please? I mean, I'm just going to say I'm not even running, but I'm up for it. Why not? Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening, and please do follow all of the candidates and myself on social media, and I'm sure that you can engage with them more there as well. Thank you so much, everybody. Candidates, thank you very much. I'll hopefully see you at a comedy show very soon.
Well done, Juliet. Well,
Take care.
Thank you, Juliet.
Let's hope so.
Thank
Take
you.
care, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Bye.